with my children by watching I Am the Prize. I remember watching it as a child. And the fact that HBO is streaming it gives me an opportunity to sit down. I have 4 children, but 2 that are still at home. So I guess I should start with them because I always brag about them. So the oldest, Michael, you happen to walk into the museum and see a tall young man who happens to look a lot like me. That is my oldest child. He's our photographer, graphic designer, digital archivist at Columbia College in Chicago as a photography and film major. And then I have a second son who is a junior at North Carolina A&T University. And I have a daughter who will be 14 next month, who plays in the Milwaukee Youth Symphony Orchestra. And she actually plays in the professional arm. So we're headed to Belgium and Denmark in the spring. And then I have a 10-year-old going on 30, Danielle, who will not be forgotten, although she's the youngest of 4. I'm not originally a Milwaukee native. I've been here almost 30 years. I moved here to attend Milwaukee School of Engineering and graduated many years ago. And the way I found myself to the museum is I was actually contracted at a firm called the Power Network, POWHER. And I left corporate America after 17 years at what was Veritech, then SBC, then AT&T. This crowd looks old enough to remember all the names. And then I spent some time at Direct Supply. And I felt a stirring, I would say, inside of me to take my education and my professional experience into the community, especially the communities that I saw around Milwaukee. Communities of color, women, and to really offer them an affordable way to be guided, strategically guided, growing a business, building a business, rebranding a business, marketing, etc. And so it really was a divine moment, I believe, because everybody, especially my parents, thought I was crazy for leaving my very successful corporate career. But something still like a call, and that's what it felt like when I left corporate America 7 years ago this month. And so through that, in order to make myself affordable for smaller clients, I've taken on some large projects like the city of Milwaukee over the years and Northwest Mutual and places like that. And eventually I got a call from America's Black Holocaust Museum asking if I would assist with their reemergence and planning for the reopening of the physical space, the marketing, and the public relations. And when Dr. Bert Davis, our president and CEO, called me, I was dropping my youngest son off at school in North Carolina. And I was like, I'm on the road, I can't really answer an RFP right now. And I just kept moving. I think at that point because we were doing a mini vacation on the way, we were standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, and so with all my kids walking around, taking a history coincidentally. And then I got home and he called again. And I was like, you still didn't buy anyone? You did. And then I started to research Dr. Cameron, not being a Milwaukee native. Of course, I had seen the previous structure, the old boxing gym that the original museum ended up having as its home for 20 years. And but I never really knew what it was. And the title, America's Black Holocaust Museum, didn't resonate with me. As a young person figuring for college, didn't pique my curiosity necessarily. It was like, well, that's interesting, but I have no idea what that means. And because we have these preconceived notions about certain words, about certain connotations. So fast forward all these years later, I look up Dr. Cameron, and I was so moved that someone who experienced such a traumatic event at such a young age then decided to take that event and use it to fuel him to live a life of love and service and to be an advocate for equality for everyone. And I watched videos of him speaking, and I read his memoir in one sitting, and that same stirring that I had when I left corporate America started to happen. And I really, my gut and I get along pretty well. And so when I feel something in my gut, I'm like, okay, museum, huh? Engineering museum. And I get asked that a lot. We just had students that from Medical College of Wisconsin, I toured them Thursday night. They were like, engineering museum, how did that work? And I was like, yeah, story, but the moral of the story is, get your degree, like I said, get it in basket weaving and then go decide what you just get. You never know where you end up landing. And so once I got to the museum, one of the first projects that I took on was I realized that, of course, the museum had been closed for 14 years since 2008, and Dr. Cameron passed in 2006. And there wasn't really a lot of professionally filmed oral histories or a lot of digitized information. There was a lot of paper, there was a lot of even some of the artifacts and things like that had gotten destroyed because the original building was unfortunately foreclosed on after Dr. Cameron passed. And the scrap vendors are pretty notorious around that neighborhood. You know, they walk around and they had taken the HVAC off the roof of the old structure. And so it left some gaping holes and caused a lot of water damage and destroyed a lot of the original artifacts that some of you may be familiar with if you went there during Dr. Cameron's tenure. We were able to salvage a few things, including if you've been to the museum since we reopened in February of last year, any place that you see wood in the museum, from the end caps of the exhibits to the welcome desk to the benches in the community space, and there's a wall with kind of an interesting decor piece of it. That's all repurposed wood from the original building because we wanted Dr. Cameron to be with us. And even throughout the exhibits, if you walk on your own and you're not with a guide, there's pictures and posts of him scattered throughout because he was there all the time, telling his story, walking people through, even if the lights are out and you're knocking on the door after hours, he let you in. You have to wait now, you have to sit 3 hours through the, you might not have expected that, but he was a great storyteller, and all of us that are there are honored to continue who he is or who he was and his mission for education, racial reconciliation, equality, and remembrance. And so then right before the museum opened, because I was like, okay, I'll help you guys market. And we, the New York Times listed historic Bronzeville, Milwaukee, and the museum was one of the places in particular for 52 places to visit for a changed world. And so all of these great things are happening, and I'm getting ready to go because that's what I do with my firm is I could get contracted. I help you do what I came to do when I leave. And about a week before it was time for us to reopen, I got another call from Dr. Berg saying, what do you think about staying on as COO? And I was like, I hadn't thought anything about that because I didn't even know you wanted a COO. But it was another one of those divine moments of every day when I would go home during the months that I was there as a consultant, I would feel like there was something in the universe telling me there was more for me to do there. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I kept leaning into my gut, and then eventually it revealed itself without me even having to ask or be curious about what was next. So now we open on February 25th to greet how many people came through that day? 1,200 people in the first day. And Mayor Johnson was there, and Governor Evers was there, and Senator Baldwin and Congresswoman Moore, and every press junket outlet, and United Airlines had us in their magazine and on every airplane that headed east of the Mississippi, and we're on US News and World Report. I was like, whoa, this is, and so then I started thinking, wow, Dr. Cameron survived a lynching at 16 years old. A majority of his career as a husband, a father, he was spent as the HVAC technician in the basement of Mayfair Mall. He was the person that kept the ice cream frozen. And so when you walk into the museum, that's one of the first pictures you'll see is a picture of him looking at the meters, holding his clipboard, making sure no one slipped and fell because that ice melted a little bit. And so, to have been accused, wrongfully accused, he was pardoned before his death, of taking part in a murder and an alleged rape, and to spend 5 years in jail, although the woman who it was stated that he and his 2 friends had raped testified at his trial that he was not there, nor was she raped. He still spent 5 years from 16 to 21 in jail for something he did not do. And while he was in jail, he experienced kindness from a white sheriff that impacted him tremendously. And that sheriff encouraged him to write a story. And he was considered such a model inmate that he was trusted to care for some of the officers' children. And he was able to do what we would call work release in this day and age. And when he got out, he started chartering NAACP chapters throughout that area of Indiana because he really didn't want to see this happen to anyone else. And his family started receiving an enormous amount of death threats and decided that they needed to leave that part of the country. He was originally born in UW, I'm so used to working in school. He was originally born in La Crosse, that's why UW came under. And so his family had decided they were going to move to Canada. Along that trek, they stopped in Milwaukee, and his parents decided, well, it seems like a good place to build a life. And he met his wife, Virginia, and they had their children, and he built a life here. And what a tremendous life he built. And he told a story, and he demonstrated, and I love Reuben Harpo was one of his best friends in life. He's still with us, he serves on our board. And one of the first oral histories I did was actually of Mr. Harpo. And he, he's a great storyteller. And he said, I got to talk like Reuben. Dr. Cameron called me and said, you want to go meet Indiana? They're going to kind of give me a party. And he said, sure. He said, because wherever he was going, I was going, because he was strong, he was tough, he inspired me. He said, so he come pick me up the next day. So there's two white people in the back with cameras. And he was like, they're from the BBC. And Mr. Harpo looked at me, I'm taping him. He's like, the British. Like, but it truly is. And he said, so we're he just flying down the road down, and it's me and him and these two white reporters in the back. And we get there and they give him his pardon, and the brother of the gentleman who died and whatever took place that night in Marion, Indiana, walked up to Dr. Cameron and gave a tearful apology for how his life had been affected for being wrongfully accused. And Dr. Cameron gave him a tearful apology for the loss that his family had experienced. And so it was moments like that that really solidified me wanting to be a part of continuing this man's legacy. Also, the next interview I did, his son Virgil is serves on our board. Virgil is just a very kind soul. And Virgil, so I asked Virgil, to tell me about your dad. And so to hear a man in his early 70s says, well, Dad, that just warmed your heart. And he said, my sisters and brothers would be running around, and Dad was always writing and reading. And finally, one day we got to age, like, what you always writing about? And he said, that time I survived the lynching. And he said, we all looked at him. And his mother, before I could only imagine, I like to do that to my kids. Because your kids underestimate your power at times. And so he said, so he told us what happened, and we all got really angry. And he said that Dr. Cameron told him, don't be angry. Anger is what caused what happened to me to happen. We only can make things better by love. And it was in moments like that that my gut was saying, like, this is really a big deal that you're having the opportunity to have these conversations, to be a part of this project. And this is something that truly can create a change for us. And so then Virgil says, I think I'm still mad, but that wasn't. And so then he went on to tell me how he acquired the first building, which was on the same property that the new building is on. It just sat a little, like it sat what would be considered behind us, Bellard Phillips. And so he said, he and Virgil told me that his dad and his mom had traveled to Jerusalem. And they went to Jerusalem because Dr. Cameron believed there was a divine intervention that saved his life under the tree. And so he wanted to go walk in what's considered the Holy Land. And while he and his wife were there, they saw everything that the church-sponsored trip he went on had planned for them to see. And on the last day, they saw a place called Yad Vashem. And they were like, well, that looks interesting, let's see what it is. Well, if you're familiar, that's the Jewish Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. So as they were walking through, he was so moved with how individuals of Jewish descent told the story for that time period for their people, that he looked at his life and he said, we need something like this in the United States. This is 1979. So there was no National Museum of African American History and Culture, no International Civil Rights Museum, no Underground Railroad Museum. This is groundbreaking thought that he's had. So he comes back home and he starts collecting things, and he's in storefronts, he's in all these little places. Finally, he discovers this foreclosed boxing gym that the city owned. And so then Virgil said he was a man on a mission. He was down at City Hall every day. And he said, finally, one day he came home, he said, they leaked it to me for $1. And Virgil said, I think they just were like, please don't come back. He said, so the next thing he knew, he and his siblings were sweeping and dusting and just trying to get it together. And he had found a local florist to create a fake tree, and and he had these ideas. And one day his friend Ruben Harpo brought two businessmen with him over to see what he was doing. Those men happened to be Dan Bader and Martin Stein, who's no longer with us, whose family owned Stein Optical. And Dan is still a great supporter, Bader Philanthropy is still a great supporter of the museum. And they came in and saw what Dr. Cameron was doing, and he shared a story with them. And Dan Bader was so moved that day, and that he told Dr. Cameron, I usually have $2,000 in my checking account, whatever I have today, you can have. You have to have $50,000 in his checking account that day, and he wrote him a check on the spot. And so he was able to go from, kind of taping and gluing things together to creating what was the first permanent iteration of Maryland's Black Holocaust Museum, which opened on June 19th, 1988. And that was very purposeful that he opened it on Juneteenth. Didn't get to live to see it become a federal holiday, but Margaret Henderson, who is thought as the founder of what is now the 52-year-old celebration of Juneteenth in Milwaukee, which is the second largest Juneteenth celebration in the country. The only one larger is in Texas, where Juneteenth actually happened. And it started in North Avenue. And so the museum then was the anchor for where Juneteenth started. It's now moved up to center, so we're a little removed. But back then, he and Miss Henderson were really good friends, and so that was very purposeful. And so the museum opens, and for 20 years, from age 72 to 92, Dr. Cameron was at the helm of the museum. And he also was demonstrating for lynching to become a federal hate crime, along with many others like Ida B. Wells, Roy Wilkins of the NAACP. And Ruben told me whenever the Ku Klux Klan came to Milwaukee, he said one time they came to the post office on Wisconsin Avenue. Dr. Cameron said, Klan don't be here, Marty, come with me. And he said he would just be in their face. Dr. Cameron was not a man of large stature at all, but he was, I think when you have moments like that we had under that tree, that you can't, no one can wrap their mind around why he's still here. That it strengthens you and it gives you a courage that some people never get to experience because you realize, my life is spared for a reason. And those that really are impacted by an experience like that think, now what should I do with it? Because it was spared for a reason. And hopefully you have an awakening that realizes that my life can't, I always say my life can't be about my forward no more. Like it has to be about service. And I'm trying to live the legacy I want to leave. And I believe that's what Dr. Cameron did. So the museum opens, and like I said, for 20 years, then in 2006, Dr. Cameron passed, and Marty Stein, who was the main benefactor for the museum for all 20 years, passed in pretty close proximity. 2008, the economy collapsed, and the museum is closed. And then many people, like my colleague Brad Pruitt and Alderwoman Malele Cobbs, and so many other community leaders really advocated and fought and lobbied for that block to be redeveloped and that it be something that positively impacted that neighborhood. A lot of people wanted that corner. And we ended up getting it back. And so that's why on February 25th last year, we reemerged. And since then, we've had close to 2,000 people come through of all ages from all over the world. I am blown away by the individuals that walk in. Recently, there was a gentleman who was originally born in Milwaukee. His name is Hezekiah Watkins. He runs the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, Mississippi. And his family moved to Mississippi from Milwaukee when he was just under 10. And when he was about 13, it was Freedom Summer. And if you're not familiar with that, it's when a lot of students of various ethnic backgrounds got together. And that's when Mississippi was just a hotbed for white supremacy, and blacks were being terrorized into not voting, and they had the most color laws, and they you know, it was just horrible to watch. The hosts were being let go on students, and the politicians there, like Governor Burnett during that time. That's where, if you watched any of the documentary on the integrating of University of Mississippi of Ole Miss, I mean, there's a lot of things that were happening. And so Hezekiah said he and his friends, or Mr. Watkins said he and his friend just wanted to get a peek, because it was all over the news that all of these kids were coming from the north to Mississippi to teach people how to read, to encourage people to register to vote. And so he said, we just wanted to see them because we just had been watching it on the news. You know, back then you got 20 minutes of local news, 20 minutes of national news. And so they had this little, I mean, and most people have one television in their house, or if you're like my grandparents, you have one big television that didn't work, and then you got another television you set on top of it. And so, but we still want only one work. And so the National Guard had come, but also the Mississippi State Patrol was there, and they had walked up to a 13-year-old Hezekiah Watkins and asked him 2 questions. They asked him, "What's your name and where were you born?" 13, innocent, wanting to answer the question honestly. He said, "My name is Hezekiah Watkins. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin." And because of that, they thought he was one of the freedom riders, and they put him on death row, not realizing he didn't know that they were trying to find out, was he a resident of that area. And so he's telling me the story. We're standing in the museum, and his wife is with him, and his nephew. He still has family here in Milwaukee, and he's written a book. And I asked him if he shared any of his story about his time while he was incarcerated in the book, and his eyes kind of went down, and he's in his 70s now, and he's like, no, some things are, you just don't want to go back to that. I pray that he shared his story with someone, because you know, that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on being at the museum, is the convener of very uncomfortable conversations and undertold stories, because we're not a Black history museum. We are an American history museum that tells the story of the African-American experience from pre-captivity through present day. And all of us, regardless of our backgrounds, our beliefs, our whatever, however we identify, we all share this nation, we share this planet, and we all intersect at some point. And some of that intersectionality is positive, and some of the historical and current events of it are not positive. But to have a better understanding of one another and realize that we're so much stronger and better together than we could ever be different is really the way to move it forward. And to think about individuals like Dr. Cameron, who at 21 was getting death threats to charter NAACP chapters. To think about someone like a Dr. King, who was, you know, not even 40 years old when he was assassinated, and so many other individuals. And I always tell my boys who are 20 and 24, because they were definitely during the time of unrest that we've had in the last few years. We're out demonstrating, especially my son, that's a photographer. He just took some amazing pictures at demonstrations in Chicago where he was at college and here. Is that I'm like, it always starts with you all. It starts with the young people. And so I'm proud of you for getting out there and letting your voice be heard and standing up for what's right. And so back to Mr. Watkins, he said, but I'm not really sure how I got off death row. He said, but the story I've been told is that President Kennedy found out that the state of Mississippi had a 13-year-old in jail on death row and said, let him out of jail. And based on the many books and documentaries that I'm always digesting on a daily basis around every history, because like I said, all of us intersect at some point. If you study the history of indigenous people, you study the history of the War of 1812, if you study the conquering of the West, if you study the American, I mean, at some point we all intersect. And so to really understand our present, we have to understand our past. We can't change history, but we can make sure we don't repeat it. And the only way we can make sure we don't repeat it is by understanding it. So, things like that happen in the museum, and it just moves us. It really moves us. Then on top of that, the museum sits on the corner of North Avenue and Bellar Phillips. And it's an interesting corner, I'll just say that. And so one of our key goals is not to just be there for a broader audience, but to be there as a resource for that neighborhood, because that neighborhood needs resources. And we see young people outside, and Brad arrives, and Nora, many of my staff that will stop, will hesitate, I should say, to go out and try to be peacemakers and mediators, and the safety of that neighborhood, and definitely thinking about health outcomes. And the pandemic really showed the health disparities amongst people of color and exacerbated pre-existing conditions, and what happens when you live in a neighborhood that's a food desert. And until that piece produce was open right there, that was a food desert. That gas station was the grocery store. And think about, everybody's talking about the price of eggs that can get to a grocery store. Like, I live down here, I live downtown, not too far away, and I always think like, there is not a gas station anywhere. I'll be down to like, my daughters laugh at me because I'm one of those people that, it'll be like down to 4 miles and just dash, and they're like, what does that mean? We need to get to a gas station pretty fast. And I'm like, there is no gas station in neighborhoods like this where the assumption is you all got cars. We can get to the gas station. I'm not walking. I'm not trying to figure out how to get someplace, and I'm not going to use the gas station as my grocery store. So there's not a monetary demand, or perhaps a way to really, if eggs are going to be $9 at the gas station, I'm going to go to Pick and Save or the Metro Market, and so it's just really interesting when you start noticing that those who have the least and need the most are usually the ones the most taken advantage of. And so we take that very seriously, and we do a lot of convening in collaboration with different organizations, and like the medical college and different grassroots organizations and other nonprofits, to see how we can help with those things. We've also been doing a convening of educators, because what we've realized is that in the school systems, and if you're familiar, there's parts of this country that books like people like Toni Morrison are banned. They're on the banned book list by the actual public school system. And so we have monthly book club. It's virtual if any of you want to join it. And this month's book club happens this Thursday. It's the Three Mothers. It's about the mothers of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and I can't think of the third one right now, Emmett Till, I believe. Next month we're going, because February 25th is not only the 1-year anniversary of our reemergence, but if Dr. Cameron was still with us, it would have been his 100th birthday. And so we're going to do his memoir, which is the biggest selling item in the museum. I mean, people we've got all kind of tchotchkes bugs and bookmarks and magnets and keychains, but it's something about when people come through, they want to understand more about who he was. And the Milwaukee Public Library also has the full collection of all his pamphlets that he wrote, and we're in the process of digitizing those and cataloging them as well, because he wrote quite a bit of them. And so it's an honor every day. We stand on such strong shoulders. But back to the community of educators, we have been having educators from K through 12 and even in higher education, where we've asked them, what do they need to help guide them through conversations like this? And also, what do they need to set the stage? I get asked by a lot of school districts, especially suburban school districts. They can be going to the Smithsonian, to the National Museum of African American Culture, and they'll call us and say, can you come just tell our students what they expect and how to have reverence in a space like that? And you know, because I love expanding minds, I typically, if I can, the answer is yes. And especially preparing them, because I remember taking my children for the first time. And when my daughter saw the section, Reconstruction and the rising of the Ku Klux Klan, and when we got to the space in the museum where Emmett Till's casket is, she just broke down crying, saying, we didn't learn this in school. And she's African American, and so and goes to a predominantly African American school, and so that I remember the impact that had on me, and I'm hugging her and I'm crying. I mean, she's crying, and people are walking past feeling very guilty, like she's right on the fire. Okay, but to give the information for them for the students to have pre-work before they come in to see us, then also to be able to debrief and decompress, because we never say enjoy your time here, or we hope you, it's like, we hope this is an impactful, because it's heavy. It's really heavy. And it's not just heavy when you on the past, but even when we get to present day. The fact that 53206 is the highest incarcerated zip code for African American men in this country. The fact that in the state of Wisconsin, our incarceration rate is about double that of the rest of the nation. And you know, we talk about the war on drugs and mandatory minimums and 3 strikes you're out, how all that legislation, and there's so many systematic stops along the way of this almost 500 years worth of history that we put into this small footprint, that you can just see the racial divide in our country and how it impacted everyone, but especially how it impacted the Black family. And hopefully those who perhaps have never really lived in a neighborhood that was diverse, or spent a lot of time and drive through the inner city and wonder, like, why is it like this, or only get a glimpse into the Black community on the news, can understand that from, well, before 1619, it was made an actual legal organized trade, the transatlantic slave trade in 1619. Then it didn't end until 1865. And so, I mean, look where we are right now. I mean, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, but it wasn't until 1865 that those slaves were found out they were free on June 19th. And so that is a lot of years. And I always tell people, it may take that many years to correct that and to break down some of those systematic thought processes. And as we can see over the last few years, especially post President Obama's time in office, that really stirred up some of those deep-seated fears in our country for some people, and what was thought to be looked at as hope turned into the opposite for some other individuals. And so we're just really thankful for the space. We're thankful for the individuals that come through. Everybody that comes through doesn't come through because they're supporting and interested in these characters at times. We get hate mail, we get people that walk in and call in, and you know, we handle it as we feel like Dr. Cameron would, with grace, with love, with understanding. And I have that FBI speak out. So with that, I've been talking for a long time. I'd love to take some questions from anybody. I really don't know. Yes. We are open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and on Sundays from noon to 5. And actually next month for the last weekend of the month for Dr. Cameron's birthday and our anniversary, we have free admission all weekend. And it's museum days right now, so it's only $5 admission from now to the 29th.
Chantel brought
and we're finding right now
membership cards.
membership.
Yeah. Yeah.
Membership cards, and there's information on here as far as
but there is post-COVID
Yes,
funding.
and yeah, and even if you don't, no pressure to sign up for membership, $30 for an individual, you get it for a whole year. I know church is about the service about
Yeah.
yeah. But you know, please go on our virtual museum, which is the website, and come visit us. And if you see my staff, ask if I'm there. I'd love to come greet you and say hello.
People with disabilities.
I can't tell you how impressed I am and blown away by the energy of people who are working at the American Black Holocaust Museum. I had the pleasure of talking to Brad.
Thank you so
Boy,
much for having me today.
You know, me, I'm no tech person. I didn't know his full background who he was, but I had more energy for the whole rest of the day after Brad. He is super. He is just super. And because I can see the energy, I see there's hope for much success at the Holocaust Museum. And we are, I mean, it's an honor to be hosting you in Milwaukee.
Thank you. It's an honor. And we could do it without you, lucky. But we just never go our work again. And that's why membership is important, and support is important, and telling other people about us is important. And so thank you for that.
Yes, oh, very much. Thank you for being here. And are there any questions, at least some experiences you've had in meeting Dr. Cameron? I know I have met him, and it is true, you don't leave right away. Because, I mean, for him, everything is more of his story.
Yes.
So you can't walk away. So, I mean, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. And I can't wait to get back there. Thank you. And we hope that through the various channels and groups at church here, that we will make a group effort of going in a group to visit the museum and get a full.
Yeah, I would love to tour. Would love to tour you all. I mean, that's really when that you feel and we have some amazing storytellers at the museum in Rios, which is the West African word for storytellers. We don't call our tour guides docents, we call them Rios. So yes, we have a great group of Rios.
Yeah, and just I was so impressed too with your drive to be the place where you can talk about hard things, hard facts, and
we don't have to agree.
Yeah,
we don't have to agree. I mean, it's really we are a place built on academic factual data, and you can agree or you can disagree, but we've done our best to make sure our scholarship is accurate to the best of our ability, and that's all we can do is to set the stage, hopefully for reconciliation, education, change, and remembrance.
Well, we're here now, and we can help keep. Not maintain the best secret in Milwaukee.
Not anymore.
It's happening and be there. Anything else here? Have you visited or been there?
Still has a great
experiences? Not yet.
Well, I hope to see you soon.
Any questions?
Are there tours?
Like I said, we rebranded.
There's not tours daily at the museum. However, for example, if you all called and said, you know, if you pick this up, then Avia, who is my executive assistant and the museum's administrator, she would set it up. She's familiar. She helps set this up, and so she would definitely do that. So if one of us know that there's a group coming and they want the tour guide, we try our best to do that. But a lot of people don't like to be toured around the museum. They actually want to just walk through on their own at their leisure. But then once individuals are walked through with one of us, our resident historian is one of the most highly awarded historians in the world. And he is a professor at Marquette University. His name is Dr. Robert Smith. He leads their Center for Urban Research and Teaching Outreach. He actually just got his program in House of Corrections fully funded. He's teaching law there in civil rights. So he always says he's a history professor that focuses on law. And he's actually doing research in South Africa, and hopefully the Apartheid Museum will be one of our sister museums within the next year. So if you can catch a tour with Dr. Rob, then I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's amazing.
We call it head to see when there might be a tour.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and we do plan to have tours for that whole weekend of the anniversary, so the 25th and 26th, they'll be special. Yeah, absolutely.
Usually
Yes.
they're.
I did want to say, I did go on MLK Day. I that we go back down to the south.
But
that day.
because we decided to really do something special, you know.
I did go to the Visual Museum this week online.
So we reached out.
Got a
to
nice
John
feel
Ross,
for.
And if you don't know
Dr.
John
Cameron,
Ross,
I think I did
so
him one
JN
time. Kind of passing and maybe a few words that's
Oh,
thing.
he
But thank you for coming. Thank you all over.
made
This is a very important piece for the criminal minds. I was sure
and
that was that motivation.
so he
That
was and just.
people
a
to
terrific
do.
job.
And it seems like community stepped up just
He's a
to do that, but I think it's probably.
he was born when.
Absolutely, and we actually, an anonymous donor purchased the building across the street from us that used to be the old Salvation Army and the community. So we're gonna be expanding within the next 2 years. That's gonna give us an additional 30,000 square feet. We actually want to buy the building on the corner. We want to turn it into a campus. Howard Fuller Collegiate Academy is moving across the street. The Brownsville Collective is right there. And so since we anchor one end of L.R. Phillips and Bison Forum anchors the other end, it's actually been put out in the community to actually anchor both of those in. And because especially with those high schoolers coming, we want them to be safe with the traffic and, you know, being around the highway and everything. So, you know, keep us in your thoughts about that, because that would be absolutely amazing. And then the Bronxville Center for the Arts is going to open in the old DNR building. So there is a resurgence happening in the whole neighborhood.
He is making individual glass.
Thank you all. Enjoy service.
For every, we will be presenting those awards to the artists, and then also to, we're giving out some special awards that are new. One is to the Weissman Center in Madison. That's our gratitude award. They're celebrating their anniversary. Right? Have to sign this. And some of them, like, I will not sign that.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you here today.
Yes.
Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. I'm Reverend Dina McFeeters, honored to serve as your associate minister. We
And
welcome people of all genders, sexualities,
so
ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all that you're bringing in with you today and all that your heart longs to set down. We welcome people watching online and everyone here participating in person. We are streaming this service live and want to say hello to the camera, all the people out there in cyberland. We are not forgetting you. The blue tape on the pew and the floor indicates the seats that are in view of the camera. We'd like to pay a special welcome to any guests that are visiting